Section 56 of Gray's Anatomy, Part 4. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Veronica Jenkins. Anatomy of the Human Body, Part 4, by Henry Gray. The External Ear. The external ear consists of the expanded portion named the auricula or pinna and the external acoustic meatus. The former projects from the side of the head and serves to collect the vibrations of the air by which sound is produced. The latter leads inward from the bottom of the auricula and conducts the vibrations to the tympanic cavity. The auricula or pinna is of an ovoid form, with its larger end directed upward. Its lateral surface is irregularly concave, directed slightly forward, and presents numerous eminences and depressions to which names have been assigned. The prominent rim of the auricula is called the helix. Where the helix turned downward behind a small tubercle, the auricular tubercle of Darwin, is frequently seen. This tubercle is very evident about the 6th month of fetal life, when the whole auricula has a close resemblance to that of some of the adult monkeys. Another curved prominence parallel with and in front of the helix is called the antehelix. This divides above into two crura, between which is a triangular depression, the fossa triangularis. The narrow curved depression between the helix and the antehelix is called the scapha. The antehelix describes a curve around a deep capacious cavity, the concha, which is partially divided into two parts by the crus, or commencement of the helix. The upper part is termed the sympa conchae, the lower part the cavum conchae. In front of the concha and projecting backward over the meatus is a small pointed eminence, the tragus, so called from its being generally covered on its under surface with a tuft of hair resembling a goat's beard. Opposite the tragus, and separated from it by the intertragic notch, is a small tubercle, the antetragus. Below this is the lobule, composed of tough aureliar and adipose tissues, and wanting the firmness and elasticity of the rest of the auricula. The cranial surface of the auricula presents elevations which correspond to the depressions on its lateral surface and after which they are named. Example: eminentia conchae, eminentia triangularis, etc. Structure: the auricula is composed of a thin plate of yellow fibrocartilage covered with integument and connected to the surrounding parts by ligaments and muscles, and to the commencement of the external acoustic meatus by fibrous tissue. The skin is thin, closely adherent to the cartilage, and covered with fine hairs furnished with sebaceous glands, which are most numerous in the concha and scaphoid fossa. On the tragus and antetragus the hairs are strong and numerous. The skin of the auricula is continuous with that lining the external acoustic meatus. The cartilage of the auricula, cartilago auriculae, cartilage of the pinna, consists of a single piece. It gives form to this part of the ear, and upon its surface are found the eminences and depressions above described. It is absent from the lobule. It is deficient also between the tragus and beginning of the helix, the gap being filled up by dense fibrous tissue. At the front part of the auricula, where the helix bends upward, is a small projection of cartilage called the spina helicus, while in the lower part of the helix the cartilage is prolonged downward as a tail-like process, the cauda helicus. This is separated from the antehelix by a fissure, the fissura antetragohelicana. The cranial aspect of the cartilage exhibits a transverse furrow, the sulcus antehelicus transversus, which corresponds with the inferior crus of the antehelix and separates the eminentia conchae from the eminentia triangularis. The eminentia conchae is crossed by a vertical ridge, ponticulus, which gives attachment to the auricularis posterior muscle. In the cartilage of the auricula are two fissures, one behind the crus helicus and another in the tragus. The ligaments of the auricula, ligamenti auricularia, Valsalva, ligaments of the pinna, consists of two sets: 1. Extrinsic, connecting it to the side of the head; 2. Intrinsic, connecting various parts of its cartilage together. The extrinsic ligaments are two in number, anterior and posterior. The anterior ligament extends from the tragus and spina helicus to the root of the zygomatic process of the temporal bone. The posterior ligament passes from the posterior surface of the concha to the outer surface of the mastoid process. The chief intrinsic ligaments are: a strong fibrous band stretching from the tragus to the commencement of the helix, completing the meatus in front and partly encircling the boundary of the concha; and b, a band between the antehelix and the cauda helicus. Other less important bands are found on the cranial surface of the pinna. The muscles of the auricula consist of two sets: 1. The extrinsic, which connect it with the skull and scalp and move the auricula as a whole; and 2. The intrinsic, which extend from one part of the auricle to another. The extrinsic muscles are the auricularies anterior, superior, and posterior. The auricularis anterior, attrahens aurum, the smallest of the three, is thin, fan-shaped, and its fibers are pale and indistinct. It arises from the lateral edge of the gallia aponeurotica, and its fibers converge to be inserted into a projection on the front of the helix. The auricularis superior, adolens aurum, the largest of the three, is thin and fan-shaped. Its fibers arise from the gallia aponeurotica and converge to be inserted by a thin, flattened tendon into the upper part of the cranial surface of the auricula. The auricularis posterior, retrahens aurum, consists of 2 or 3 fleshy fasciculi which arise from the mastoid portion of the temporal bone by short aponeurotic fibers. They are inserted into the lower part of the cranial surface of the concha. Actions. In man, these muscles possess very little action. The auricularis anterior draws the auricula forward and upward. The auricularis superior slightly raises it, and the auricularis posterior draws it backward. The intrinsic muscles are the helicus major, helicus minor, tragus, antetragus, transversus auriculi, obliquus auriculi. The helicus major is a narrow vertical band situated upon the anterior margin of the helix. It arises below from the spina helicus and is inserted into the anterior border of the helix just where it is about to curve backward. The helicus minor is an oblique fasciculus covering the crus helicus. The tragus is a short, flattened vertical band on the lateral surface of the tragus. The antetragus arises from the outer part of the antetragus and is inserted into the cauda helicus and antehelix. The transversus auriculi is placed on the cranial surface of the pinna. It consists of scattered fibers, partly tendinous and partly muscular, extending from the eminentia conchae to the prominence corresponding with the scapha. The obliquus auriculi, also on the cranial surface, consists of a few fibers extending from the upper and back part of the concha to the convexity immediately above it. Nerves. The auricularies anterior and superior and the intrinsic muscles on the lateral surface are supplied by the temporal branch of the facial nerve, the auricularis posterior, and the intrinsic muscles on the cranial surface by the posterior auricular branch of the same nerve. The arteries of the auricula are the posterior auricular from the external carotid, the anterior auricular from the superficial temporal, and a branch from the occipital artery. The veins accompany the corresponding arteries.